Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Kenny, head of community here at Everything Cannabis. Now, for today's video, we are getting straight into it right away. If you haven't watched the Welcome to Everything Cannabis video yet, highly recommend you do that. I'll place it in the description or somewhere in this video for you to click on. But what you'll learn in that video is our approach to tackling and learning the cannabis industry. And we're going to treat it like a puzzle game. Okay, so every question that we have about the industry, whether it be about the plant itself, the business operations, legislation, government, policies around cannabis. Every question asked is a puzzle piece to the puzzle that we are putting together. So for today's video, I want to reiterate the starting question for you guys so that we can transition into the actual learning process itself. So with today's video, the common question I'm always going to have at the beginning is the following. What are the puzzle pieces in front of me? What do I currently know about cannabis? What do I not know about cannabis? And what pieces do I need to find in order to build this puzzle? So in terms of what I currently know about cannabis, well, in Canada, completely legal. In Australia, it's illegal still. They went down the medical route. So recreational use of cannabis is still not allowed. And then in every other countries, it's different in terms of legalization. With that knowing, my follow-up question is why? Why is cannabis legal in some countries and why is cannabis illegal in other countries? Which leads to the following question. How did cannabis become illegal worldwide? So from this question, we are going to be able to collect puzzle pieces and we're going to be able to put it together. So how did cannabis become illegal worldwide? And upon asking this question, I was able to discover four key puzzle pieces. Obviously, there's more depending on who you are, whether you are a doctor, a scientist, a researcher, someone who works within government, or myself working in the medical cannabis space as a user of cannabis for a long time. Each individual is going to have their own set of pieces of puzzle that they want to go after and put together in this puzzle. So for me, there were four key pieces that we came across. And here are the four puzzle pieces. So the very first puzzle we discovered in this game was number one, the Single Convention on Narcotics Treaty, which was signed in 1961. This was the very first moment in time where cannabis actually became illegal worldwide for recreational use. From there, we dug a little bit deeper and we were able to discover three more puzzle pieces. Number two, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. This did play a big role in influencing the Convention on Narcotic Drugs Treaty back in 1961. Now, who was responsible for the Marijuana Tax Act? This led us to key piece number three, which is Harry Anslinger, head of Federal Bureau of Narcotics in the United States. What was his motive? Why did he campaign to villainize cannabis? What inspired him? Why did he want to do this in the first place? Okay, so it led us to number four, which was the Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 1920. Whether this has to do with xenophobia, we'll have to find out. But there was a hidden agenda here that Harry Anslinger had, which made him villainize cannabis and try to influence the American society to feel the same way that he did with the plant. So there's always an agenda when it comes to these type of conversations, and this is something that I'm really looking forward to because a lot of this plays a huge role and it impacts what we are currently doing today in the cannabis industry. In my case would be the medical cannabis space. All right, so how does one puzzle piece connect to the other? That's what we're going to do here on Everything Cannabis. And for today's video, we're only going to get into the first one, which is the Single Convention on Narcotics Treaty, which was signed in 1961. In terms of number 2, 3, and 4, those will be completed in separate videos, but I hope that by listening to each one individually, you guys will be able to piece it together yourself, however you choose to learn this information. But this is the approach I'm personally taking at the moment to understand the cannabis industry. So let's get into the Single Convention on Narcotics Treaty. All right, so the very first puzzle piece we want to get into is the Single Convention on Narcotics Treaty, which was signed on March 30th, 1961 by 186 countries. This was the first international treaty to prohibit cannabis. So this convention was aimed to combat drug abuse by coordinated international action. So there are two forms of intervention and control that work together. First, it seeks to limit the possession, use, trade in, distribution, import, export, manufacture, and production of drugs exclusively to medical and scientific purposes. Second, it combats drug trafficking through international cooperation to deter and discourage drug traffickers. So, right away, they've placed restrictions and limitations on those working within the medical fields, rightfully so. They want to control most of that because they feel the drug is dangerous, not just cannabis, but a whole bunch of other drugs as well. The second one is to make sure that drug trafficking is not happening. However, if you look at how the last few decades have gone, drug traffickers will always find a way. Okay. So cannabis somehow got placed into this treaty. And the most interesting thing that I discovered coming out of this is that there was no actual scientific evidence to prove that cannabis was a dangerous drug. And they placed it as a Schedule 4 drug next to heroin. Heroin, highly addictive drug. I don't know much about it. I don't consume it. But to place cannabis next to heroin and compare it in terms of the same schedule, that just shows that they feared cannabis in some way, shape, or form, and they didn't want the public to get their hands on it. Just want to put a disclaimer before we continue here. Everything we share here on Everything Cannabis is for educational purposes only. If you do plan on going out, getting cannabis to use it for your own medical treatments, we highly advise that you go speak to a doctor first to make sure that you get the right information. All right. So, this channel, everything here is for educational purposes only. We're not here to sell, promote the use of cannabis in any way, shape, or form. So please, if you do plan on doing that, go speak to a doctor. So getting back into it here, this was the very first piece of resource that I found, only because we read that it was signed by 186 United Nation party members, which is 186 countries. So this is where I got that line from, to understand why they wanted the convention signed in the first place. Next up, just doing a little bit more research to understand the correlation between cannabis in 1961. But this is what I came across, and I want to read it out to you guys. I'll make sure to put these articles in the description below for you as well, so you can go in and read it for yourself. So, a history of how cannabis was included in the international drug control system by James Mills. James Mills wrote a book titled Cannabis Nation: Control and Consumption in Britain, 1928 to 2008, which includes information about the history around cannabis control in international drug control treaties. The question is, how was consensus established on cannabis ahead of 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs? There was no consensus on cannabis control before the 1950s. So in 1925, and the signing of the conventions on opium, cannabis was isolated from the debates. A subcommittee on cannabis was then established and ran until 1940, but its work was discontinued because of the Second World War, so no recommendation was put forward. Discussions on cannabis was started again in 1950 at the fifth session of the CND, where a draft of what would become the 1961 convention was circulated. Two solutions were presented. One was to entirely ban cannabis consumption. The other was to ban cannabis consumption except for medical and scientific purposes. Discussions were deferred until 1952, when a World Health Organization expert committee was established to assess medical and scientific uses of cannabis. It decided there were insufficient grounds for medical and scientific uses of the substance. Based on the WHO decision, the CND Secretariat presented another proposal to ban all cannabis use, but this was opposed by India. The Secretary decided that more information was needed on cannabis and therefore decided to conduct an international survey through questionnaires. However, these questionnaires focused primarily on recreational use of cannabis rather than on its medical and traditional use. In 1959, a coalition of countries decided to declare that cannabis had no medical purpose. In 1960, the WHO conducted a study on the use of cannabis for antibiotics and decided that cannabis had a negligible part to play in it. This report was criticized as being fundamentally flawed. In 1961, the CND introduced a proposal who ignored the WHO recommendation and banned cannabis consumption except for medical and scientific purposes. As India had opposed the ban on cannabis leaves used for indigenous purposes, the compromise was that there would be a separation between cannabis and cannabis resin. So I just want to share my comments on this article here. Okay, what I'm understanding from a business perspective. So cannabis in the past was being used, nothing wrong with it. And here you go, you have a group of politicians, a group of individuals working within an organization. Somehow they have the power and the control to vote and get a proposal approved in terms of banning whatever they want to ban. Whether or not they have scientific evidence, these people have control. So it's fascinating from a business perspective when you understand healthcare, when you understand government, and you understand drugs, even these governing bodies, they always work together to create rules and policies around things. And society just are blank to it all. Unless you work in the industry, you don't really care, you know? So it's interesting from a business perspective. As a business operator, government, policies, legislation, that is also a business. So this is very fascinating to me. This is intriguing to me because as someone who's in business working within medical cannabis, there are all of these other areas within the industry that I need to understand, legislation and policies being one of them. So after reading this, right, there's more information that I need to look into, but just reading through this, in order to get cannabis approved worldwide and accepted by society, you have to work with the existing system. And it has to do with the World Health Organization. It has to do with your own country's legislation. So there are many hoops we have to go through and understand in order to play the game effectively and efficiently. So, with that being said, guys, this is the very first puzzle piece for me when it comes to understanding the cannabis industry. We know that there's a single convention on narcotic drugs. That has probably been amended moving forward in 1971, I believe, but I need to understand the timeline and the history. And as I'm going through the timeline and the history, I'm finding the key puzzle pieces that I see plays a role in what is going on in the cannabis industry today. The legalization, the illegalization of cannabis is a massive role in what we're doing. Because if you don't understand the legal aspect of cannabis, you're always going to run into a wall, especially when you're operating within the medical cannabis space, because there are rules that you have to follow and you have to play within those rules, but also understand that you can actually create the rules yourself if you play the game the right way. So that's all I want to share with you guys for today's puzzle piece. In the next video, we'll talk a little bit more about the Marijuana Tax Act, and we'll tie it in to the single convention on narcotic drugs as well to see what the influence is from 1937 to 1961. All right, so that's it for the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it and you were able to take away a piece of puzzle of this cannabis game. If you do like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you want to be notified on when we upload next, hit the notification bell. Don't forget to share this video with your family and friends, anyone that would be interested in cannabis themselves. But that's all I got for today, and I will catch you guys in the next video.